The silence in our house wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a tomb that had been recently sealed. It had been 6 months since my father, Elias, died of a sudden, violent stroke, and the world still felt like it was made of cardboard and gray paint. My wife, Lisa, had been my rock. She was the one who handled the funeral arrangements, the one who held me when I woke up screaming, and the one who quietly ushered my father's belongings out of sight to help with the healing process. She was sweetness personified, too good for a wreck like me. But tonight, the silence broke. I was in the basement at 11:42 p.m., hunched over the HVAC system. The house was settling into its bones with a series of groans and pops. Lisa was asleep upstairs, exhausted from her shift at the clinic. As I reached through a recessed gap in the floorboard to check a rattling filter, my fingers brushed against something that didn't belong there. It wasn't metal, and it wasn't dust. It was cold, smooth, and plastic. Then, it vibrated. The sound was a low rhythmic hum against the galvanized steel. Bzz, bzz. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. I pulled the object out. It was a cheap, prepaid burner phone, the kind you buy at a gas station with cash. The screen was cracked, but the light it cast was a brilliant, sickly blue. One new message. I shouldn't have looked. But in a marriage, you know when a secret is a surprise party, and when it's a knife in the back. I swiped the screen. There was no passcode. The message was from a contact simply saved as E. I'm getting hungry, Lisa. The dark is cold tonight. Tell me about the boy again. My breath hitched. My father's name was Elias. He had called me the boy well into my 30s. But my father was buried 6 feet under in St. Jude's Cemetery. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a prank. A sick, twisted prank. Maybe Lisa was being harassed? I scrolled up. The history went back months. Lisa, sent 3 weeks ago. He's still not sleeping. He misses you so much it's breaking him. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. E. You're doing great, sweetheart. Just keep him steady. He was always soft, like his mother. I need to feel closer, Lisa. The veil is thin tonight. Lisa. I left the window unlatched in the study. I love you. I leaned against the cold concrete wall, the burner phone trembling in my hand. I love you? My sweet, gentle Lisa was sending those words to someone pretending to be my dead father. Or worse, she was talking to someone she thought was my dead father. I began to dig through the older messages, my eyes burning. It was a chronicle of my own life being dissected and fed to a stranger. Lisa had been reporting on my grief like a lab technician. She told E about my nightmares, about the way I couldn't smell my father's old cologne without shaking. And E responded with things only my father would know. Lisa, check the top drawer of the desk in the study. The key is in the false bottom of the cigar humidifier. Give it to him when he's ready. I froze. I hadn't found that key. I didn't even know there was a false bottom. I dropped the wrench I was holding and it clattered against the floor. Upstairs, I heard the floorboards creak. Lisa was awake. I shoved the burner phone into my pocket and killed the basement lights. I stood there in the pitch black, my heart hammering. I heard her footsteps, light, rhythmic, moving toward the kitchen. I crept up the stairs and watched through the crack in the door. Lisa was standing at the kitchen table. She looked pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She wasn't lighting a black candle for some dark ritual. She was lighting a small tea light next to a framed photo of my father. She looked terrified. She reached into her pocket, fumbling for something. She panicked when she didn't find the phone. Her hands shook so hard, she almost knocked the candle over. Elias? She whispered into the empty room. Her voice was thin, breaking. I lost it. I can't find the phone. Please don't be mad. I'm doing what you asked. I'm taking care of him. So she wasn't a co-conspirator. She was a puppet. She looked like a woman who was being held hostage by a ghost, or a man who knew how to play one. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out. A new message from E. He's behind the door, Lisa. He has the phone. He's going to ruin everything. Lisa's head snapped toward the door. She saw me. Her eyes went wide, and she didn't look guilty. She looked absolutely petrified for my safety. "Jason, get out!" she screamed, lunging toward me, not to attack, but to push me back. "He's watching. He told me if you found out, he'd have to finish it." "Who, Lisa? Who's watching?" I yelled, grabbing her shoulders. Before she could answer, the home security system's keypad by the door started to beep. Then, the smart TV in the living room flickered to life. A video began to play. It was a live feed of us, right now, from a camera hidden inside the smoke detector. And then, the front door, the one I had locked myself, slid open with a heavy mechanical click. A man stood there. He was tall, wearing my father's old raincoat, his face shadowed by a brimmed hat. He held a secondary phone in his hand, the screen glowing. "I told you not to let him play with my things, Lisa," the man said. The voice was identical to my father's, but as he stepped into the light, I realized the horror was much more human. It was my father's brother, Uncle Arthur, the man who had supposedly died in a car fire 20 years ago. The man who had been my father's business partner, and the man who I now realized looked enough like my father to be a twin. "Arthur?" I whispered. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "Your father had a lot of secrets, Jason, and a lot of life insurance. Lisa was just helping me collect. Weren't you, sweetheart?" Lisa collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "He said he'd kill you, Jason. He said if I didn't help him find the account codes in the journals, he'd make it look like you killed your father." And then, the burner phone in my hand vibrated one last time. "E, family is forever, boy. Put down the phone, and let's discuss the inheritance." The air in the kitchen felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. I held Lisa tightly as she shook in my arms, her tears soaking through my shirt. My mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the image of the kindly Uncle Arthur, the man I'd mourned as a child, with the predatory figure standing in our doorway. Arthur didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man who had spent 20 years in the shadows, growing hard and bitter. He stepped into the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and calmly closed the door behind him. He didn't just lock it. He engaged the deadbolt and the security chain with a slow, deliberate click. "You look like you've seen a spirit, Jason," Arthur said, his voice carrying that same rasping resonance that had haunted the burner phone. He tossed his own phone onto the table next to my father's journals. "But as you can see, I'm quite substantial." "You were dead," I managed to choke out. "The car accident in '06. They found the remains. They found your watch." Arthur let out a dry, hacking laugh. "They found a body, and they found my watch on its wrist. Your father was always the good one, the one with the stable life and the pretty wife, but he was also the one with the gambling debts. He needed a way out, and I needed to disappear. We made a trade. I gave him my death, and he gave me a monthly stipend to stay in the dark and manage the less legal sides of his investments." He walked toward the counter, picking up the kitchen knife Lisa had been holding earlier. He examined the edge with a terrifying casualness. "But then, Elias got greedy," Arthur continued, his eyes snapping to mine. "He stopped paying. He thought he could bury me for real this time. He thought he could enjoy the inheritance from your mother all by himself." Lisa let out a strangled sob. "Jason, I didn't know. He contacted me 3 months ago. He sent me videos of you from inside the house. He told me he was your father, that he had faked his death to protect us from dangerous people. He said if I didn't help him find the access code to the offshore accounts, those people would come for you. He made me use that phone. He said he was watching every room." My blood ran cold. The E on the phone hadn't been a ghost. It had been a blackmailer using our own smart home system against us. Every private moment of grief, every conversation I had with Lisa, all streamed through a burner phone in the hands of a sociopath. "Why the burner phone, Arthur?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my brain searched for a weapon. Anything. "Why the ghost act? Why torture us?" "Because Lisa's a romantic," Arthur sneered, gesturing toward her with the knife. She wanted to believe her father-in-law was reaching out from the beyond. It made her compliant. It made her useful. If she thought I was just a bitter old uncle, she might have gone to the police. But a grieving son's father? That's a powerful tether. He stepped closer, the light of the tea candle casting a long, monstrous shadow behind him. But now, the games are over. Elias had the codes written in those journals, ciphers. He was a paranoid old bastard. I've had Lisa scouring them for weeks, but she's not as bright as your father was. You, however, you have his mind. You're going to finish what she started. "And if I don't?" I said, stepping in front of Lisa. Arthur reached into the pocket of his raincoat and pulled out a small, black remote. "I didn't just hack your cameras, Jason. I've been living in your crawl space for weeks. I spent my time wisely. I've replaced your smart thermostat and the gas line regulator. One press of this button, and the pilot light in the basement becomes a detonator. We all go up in a tragic gas leak, just like Elias always feared." I looked down at the burner phone still in my hand. It was a piece of junk, a $20 piece of plastic, but it had been the bridge between my reality and this nightmare. I realized then that Arthur wasn't here just for the money. He was here to replace the brother he hated. He wanted the life Elias had, the house, the money, the control. "You killed him," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical weight. "The stroke, it wasn't natural, was it?" Arthur's smile widened, showing yellow teeth. "Elias always had a high sensitivity to certain medications. A little extra in his evening tea, a little stress, and the human brain is a very fragile thing. He died in that chair staring at me, Jason. He died knowing I had won." Lisa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had been the one to find my father in that chair. She had been the one to call the paramedics, while Arthur likely watched from behind the vent in the wall. "You're a monster," Lisa whispered. "I'm a survivor," Arthur corrected. "Now Jason, the journals. Page 42 has a list of dates. They correspond to something in that humidifier. You have 10 minutes to give me the codes, or I decided I'd rather be dead again than poor." He sat down at the kitchen table, the knife point resting on the wood. He looked at his watch. I looked at the journals. I looked at the man who looked so much like my father that it made my skin crawl. I realized I wasn't just fighting for our lives. I was fighting for the memory of the man I thought I knew. My father might have been a gambler and a liar, but he was mine. Arthur was just a parasite in a raincoat. "The codes aren't in the journals, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold hum. Arthur's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, boy." "I'm not lying. My father didn't use dates. He used poetry. And he didn't hide the key in the humidifier." I felt the weight of the burner phone in my hand. I knew the layout of this house better than he did. I knew where the dead zones were. I knew where the old manual overrides for the security system were. The ones that didn't run through the smart grid he'd hacked. I gripped Lisa's hand and squeezed it twice. Our code for get ready to run. "The key's in the basement," I lied, my heart hammering. "Under the HVAC, right where I found this phone." Arthur stood up, the knife glinting. "Then lead the way, Jason. But remember, my finger is on the trigger." The descent into the basement felt like walking into the throat of a beast. I could hear Arthur's heavy, rhythmic breathing behind me, the sound of a predator who had believed he had already won. Lisa followed close to him, her face the mask of terror, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds. I needed her to be ready. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Arthur rasped. The knife was tucked into the sleeve of his coat, but the remote, the trigger for the gas line, was clutched tightly in his left hand. The basement was a labyrinth of shadows and exposed pipes. I led him past the water heater, past the stacks of old moving boxes, toward the far corner where the main HVAC unit sat like a hulking iron heart. This was the one place in the house where the Wi-Fi signal was a joke. The thick concrete foundation and the lead shielding from the old furnace blocked almost every frequency. If his remote relied on the house smart hub, it would be useless here. Under the main duct, I said, pointing to the dark gap where I'd found the phone. There's a loose brick in the foundation. He kept the lockbox there. Arthur sneered, his greed overriding his caution. He stepped forward, shoving me aside with his shoulder. He knelt down, the light from the single overhead bulb casting his shadow across the floor. Finally, he muttered, reaching into the gap. Now, Lisa, I yelled. I didn't go for Arthur. I went for the main power lever on the wall. I slammed it down. The basement was instantly plunged into a total, suffocating darkness. Arthur roared, a sound of pure animalistic rage. I heard the frantic click, click, click of the remote. It's not working, I shouted into the blackness. The signal is dead down here, Arthur. You're not in the grid anymore. I heard him scrambling, the sound of his boots skidding on the concrete. I moved by memory. This was my house. I knew exactly where the low-hanging pipes were, where the floor dipped, where the heavy metal shelving stood. I grabbed a heavy pipe wrench from the workbench and stayed low. Jason! Lisa's voice was a frantic whisper from the near stairs. Get up the stairs, Lisa. Lock the door. I'm not leaving you. A beam of light cut through the dark. Arthur had pulled out his own phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. The light danced wildly across the walls. When it hit me, I saw his face. It wasn't the face of my father. It was a distorted mask of hate. You think you're clever, boy? Arthur hissed. He lunged at me, the knife held low. I swung the wrench. It caught him in the ribs with a sickening crack. He gasped, the phone flying from his hand and clattering across the floor, the light spinning until it came to rest, pointing toward the ceiling. He fell to one knee, wheezing, but he still had the remote. He held it up, his thumb shaking over the button. I'll run back to the stairs. I'll get the signal back and blow this whole block to hell. He tried to stand, but Lisa appeared out of the shadows behind him. She didn't have a wrench. She had a heavy glass jar, the one from the kitchen, the one he'd used to store his trophies from the humidifier. She brought it down on the back of his head with everything she had. The glass shattered. Arthur slumped forward, his forehead hitting the concrete with a dull thud. The remote rolled out of his hand. I lunged for it, kicking it far across the floor. I didn't stop. I grabbed Arthur's wrists and pulled his own zip ties from his raincoat pocket, the ones he'd clearly intended for us. I cinched him tighter on his wrists and ankles until the plastic bit into his skin. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a house that had finally been purged. I picked up Arthur's phone. It was still unlocked. I looked at the screen. There were no ghosts, no Elias from beyond the grave. Just a folder of surveillance apps and a series of saved voice clips, digital reconstructions of my father's voice, cobbled together from old home movies and voicemails. It was a masterpiece of domestic terrorism. I looked at my uncle, the man who had stolen my father's face to ruin my life. He was groaning, consciousness slowly returning to his eyes. The police are on their way, Arthur, I said, my voice steady. And I think they'll be very interested to know how a dead man managed to kill his brother and break into a house. Lisa came to my side, her hand trembling as she took mine. We stood together in the dim, reflected light of the fallen phone. He's not your father, she whispered, as if finally convincing herself. No, I said, looking at the man on the floor. My father is exactly where he belongs. And soon, Arthur, you will be too. I took the burner phone, the cheap blue-lit catalyst of the whole nightmare, and placed it on the floor. I raised the heavy wrench one last time and brought it down, shattering the screen into 1,000 dark pieces. The vibration stopped. The blue light died. For the first time in 6 months, I could breathe.